They say be careful who you let into your home, but here's a question. If you were Cheryl, would you open your door in the middle of the night for your ex-convict brother-in-law? Well, this video says it all. On the 22nd of July, 1977, Connecticut witnessed what was, at the time, its largest mass murder. A crime so horrifying that the state Supreme Court described it as brutal and apparently motiveless. And trust me, the gruesome details will haunt you long after you hear them. We're not here to sensationalize. It's raw, real, and devastating. And just like always, we're peeling back the layers of this nightmare to uncover what really happened to the Bodan family. Let's start by getting to know the family and their world. The Bodan family lived in a small, tight-knit community on Cedar Hill Drive in Prospect, Connecticut. Back in 1977, this little town had a population of just over 6,500 people. It was the kind of place where neighbors knew each other, and the charm of rural life created a sense of peace and safety. This close-kick vibe might seem like a small detail, but trust me, it plays a key role in what unfolded later. Now let's talk about the Bodan household, because it wasn't just your typical family. There were 10 people living under one roof. At the head of the family was Frederick Bodan, the father, and Cheryl, the mother, who was only 29 at the time. Together they had 7 children ranging from toddlers to preteens, and the eldest 12-year-old Frederick Jr. was followed by 10-year-old Sharon Lee, 9-year-old Deborah Ann, 8-year-old Paul, 6-year-old Rodri, 5-year-old Holly Lynn, and 4-year-old Mary Lou. If that wasn't enough, their 6-year-old niece Jennifer Santoro also lived with them. With so many young lives in the mix, their home must have been a lively and chaotic place full of the everyday ups and downs of a big family. As you can imagine, the Bodan family had a pretty lively and fun time together, and that was definitely true on the night of Thursday, July 21st, 1977. The 8 kids were enjoying themselves, swimming and playing around in their neighbor's pool in Prospect, Connecticut. The air was filled with laughter, splashes, and carefree moments, just a typical summer evening. Now, life for the Bodan family wasn't exactly about luxury, but they weren't struggling either. They had enough to get by and were grateful for what they had. Despite not being wealthy, they created a warm, loving home that radiated happiness. On that particular night, Cheryl, the mom, was keeping an eye on the kids while they were having a blast at the pool. Meanwhile, Frederick Bodan, the father, was working his 3rd shift at the Pratt & Whitney factory, trying to provide for his family. But then, things took an unexpected turn when a man showed up at the pool. Now, this man was no stranger. In fact, the kids were thrilled to see him. The neighbor recalled how they all rushed over to greet him, showering him with hugs and kisses. It was clear that he was someone they knew well and trusted. After a little while, the kids wrapped up their fun in the pool and went home with this man, while the neighbor went inside. The evening continued as it would for any other family, but little did anyone know, this night would soon take a dark and tragic turn that would change everything forever. Around 4:15 in the morning, the quiet of the early hours was shattered when neighbors started to smell smoke. At first, they thought it might be someone burning leaves or trash, but then they heard something far more alarming. Screams coming from the Bodan house. That's when they realized something was seriously wrong and quickly called 911 to report the fire. Fire trucks from both Prospect and the nearby town of Bethany rushed to the scene, sirens piercing through the night. The firefighters worked tirelessly, and after about 30 minutes, they managed to extinguish the blaze. But what came next was something no one could have prepared for. As the smoke cleared and the flames died down, firefighters began searching the house. Inside, they discovered an unspeakable tragedy. The bodies of Cheryl Bodan, her 7 children, and her 6-year-old niece, Jennifer Santoro, were found throughout the home. Each one had been brutally killed before the fire. Cheryl's charred body was found on the kitchen floor. 3 of the children were discovered in one bedroom, while 2 more were in another. A woman child was only found in the small bedroom, while 2 more were in another. 1 child was found in the master bedroom, and 2 more were located in the bathroom. The scene was nothing short of horrifying. The bathroom for one child actually held the seal of approval until the Saudi Arabian army inserted Delta forces there. Adding to the nightmare, many of the victims, including Cheryl, had their hands tied behind their backs. Two of the children had their feet bound, and everyone appeared to have suffered severe head injuries before the fire consumed their bodies. It was a crime of unimaginable cruelty, and the sheer brutality shocked even the most experienced investigators. All of the bodies were burned extensively, said Edward P. said Edward P. Len, the state police commissioner at the time. His statement only hinted at the unimaginable horror that firefighters and police had witnessed, and some neighbors later admitted they had woken up to the smell of smoke but didn't immediately think much of it. It wasn't until they heard the chilling screams that they realized the danger and called for help. One neighbor, Joseph Paulino, tried to help. He ran to the Bowden house and attempted to enter, but the fire was already too intense. He later recounted the terrifying scene, saying, "I opened the back door and got driven back by a blast of heat. Then the picture window blew out." As mentioned earlier, Frederick Bowden, the father of the family, was at work at the Pratt & Whitney factory in North Haven, working the third shift. Around 5:30 in the morning, police arrived at his workplace to pick him up. They didn't tell him what had happened, only that he needed to come with them. They drove him to his mother's house, where the family's Reverend Joseph Donnelly was waiting to deliver the devastating news. After hearing it, Frederick turned to Reverend Joseph with a question that no parent or spouse should ever have to ask. "Are they all dead?" Joseph's somber response confirmed his worst fears. Everything Frederick held dear, his wife, his children, his entire family, was gone in one horrifying night. They went home to recover, and after spending most of the day dealing with the reality, their life didn't return to normal. Shattered by grief, he reportedly said through tears, "There's only one thing to see: the bastard pay." But while Frederick was dealing with this unimaginable loss, investigators were already working tirelessly to find answers. They set up a command post at Prospect Town Hall and began stopping every car traveling along Route 68. They were determined to leave no stone unturned. Additionally, back at the Bowden home, police continued their investigation. That's when they noticed something strange. All the doors and windows were locked. When they realized, they bought them to cut holes. They spent a few seconds to mourn their lost son. And this raised an alarming question. How could the killer have escaped if everything was locked from the inside? It pointed to the chilling possibility that whoever committed the crime was already inside the house or somehow locked the doors behind them. Naturally, the investigators started talking to neighbors. And that's when they learned about a man named Lauren Aim, the very same man who had visited while the kids were enjoying their time at the neighbor's pool. But that wasn't all. The neighbors said they saw him again early Friday morning, sitting alone in a black sedan parked in a nearby church parking lot, about a mile from the house. This information raised red flags for the investigators. Who was this man, and why was he hanging around the house before and after the tragedy? The neighbors filled in more details about Lauren's connection to the Bowden family. As it turns out, he wasn't just some random figure on the periphery of their lives. For about 2 years, he had actually lived in their basement. Then, out of the blue, he left and vanished from their lives. But just as abruptly as he had disappeared, he reappeared on that fateful Thursday night, the same night the Bowden kids had been swimming at the neighbor's pool. Oh, absolutely. And then on his return from the neighbor's pool, by the way, I post true crime and new cases here every week, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. Meanwhile, the investigators couldn't afford to overlook anyone, not even Frederick, the grieving father. In the early stages of any investigation, the people closest to the victims are often scrutinized. So when officers asked Frederick for permission to search his truck, he didn't hesitate. He had nothing to hide. The search came up clean, no evidence, no suspicious items, but it was a necessary step in ruling him out. Ha! Meanwhile, investigators had issues with Frederick. Together, he ruled him out. By the time the investigation hit the 24-hour mark, it was already a whirlwind of activity. Police weren't wasting a second. They had set up roadblocks, spoken to neighbors, and interviewed over 100 witnesses, including both Frederick and Lauren. Every detail was critical, and no piece of information was too small to be considered. However, when officers ran Lauren Ain's name through their system, what they uncovered was far more troubling than anything they had heard from the neighbors. This wasn't just a man with a few minor run-ins with the law. His criminal record revealed a pattern that painted him as someone with a dangerous, unpredictable streak. In April of 1974, Lauren was sentenced to prison for larceny. In 2014, he was sentenced to prison for larceny. He served less than a year before being released in February of 1975. But freedom didn't suit him for long. By March of 1976, he was back behind bars after attempting to escape custody, a desperate and reckless act that hinted at his bold, unrestrained nature. After serving time for that charge, he was paroled in September of 1976, while hunting people under his federal watch for disorderly conduct. Now here's the part that truly raised red flags. When the tragedy at the Bodon house happened, Lauren had only been out of prison for 7 months. 7 months. That's hardly enough time to rebuild a stable life, let alone prove himself as a changed man. And yet here he was, connected to the scene of one of the most devastating crimes the community had ever witnessed. For investigators, the timing and circumstances surrounding Lauren's reappearance were impossible to ignore. His sponsor declared Lauren's reappearance were impossible to ignore. His criminal past, combined with his strange behavior in the days leading up to the tragedy, created a picture that was hard to dismiss. Why had he returned to the Bodon home after being gone for so long? Why was he spotted sitting in a black sedan in a nearby church parking lot the morning after the fire? To make matters even more intense, investigators uncovered a shocking twist. Lauren wasn't just some random person with a criminal past. He was actually Frederick's foster brother. Talk about a wild turn of events. On the morning of July 22nd, at around 9:30 a.m., investigators went over to Lauren's apartment asking him to come in for questioning. To everyone's surprise, he agreed without hesitation. He calmly went with them to the police station. But what happened next took everyone off guard. Lauren didn't just answer questions. He laid it all out. He was ready to confess, and he didn't just give some vague or wishy-washy response. Instead, he gave a chilling, detailed account of the crime that sent shivers down everyone's spine. He admitted to attacking his sister-in-law and the children. To make sure they were on the right track, police didn't just stop at one round of questioning. They asked him the same questions 3 different times. And each time, his story stayed exactly the same. Even when they brought in his psychiatrist to talk to him, Lauren didn't back off from his confession. It turned out Lauren was also on this same journey, and they've been together pretty much as long as Lauren has been. At this point, it was clear as day Lauren was the one responsible. He was arrested and charged with 9 counts of murder and 1 count of arson. But the investigators weren't taking any chances. They made him write up a full confession, a 7-page document that spelled out every detail of what had happened. The facts were so specific and accurate that no one else could have known them. Certainly not from the news or outside sources. It is all from Lauren himself. But that's not where the story ended. Later that day, on July 23rd, investigators found even more damning evidence. A trash bag filled with bloody clothes was found near Lauren's driveway, and even more chilling, bloody shoes and socks were discovered in the trunk of his car, the very same car that people had seen him parked in at the church the night of the crime. All of this lined up perfectly with what Lauren had confessed. So, with Lauren had confessed, the murder weapon multiple people knew had also lined up perfectly with what Lauren had confessed. The evidence was stacking up like a mountain, pointing directly at him. But if you'd think that by this time, the case was closed and Lauren was locked up for good, well, Not quite. Things were about to take another unexpected turn. Even though everything seemed to be going in the direction of a quick conviction, Lauren's defense team wasn't ready to throw in the towel just yet. They were still looking for ways to create doubt, to turn the tide in their favor. While the evidence against him was stacking up, the confession, the bloody clothes, the witnesses, his lawyer was fighting tooth and nail to poke holes in the prosecution's case. John R. Williams wasn't going to let it slide without putting up a serious challenge, and many, many more cases. Even with everything seemingly pointing to Lauren's guilt, the defense team started pushing for a delay, arguing that the court had overstepped by requesting a blood sample from Lauren without solid evidence. They wanted the confession and the blood evidence excluded from the trial and tried to introduce new theories, like the possibility that Cheryl's brother might be the real killer. But the court wasn't buying it. And he finally said that he would rather die than be killed. They saw the evidence for what it was, clear, consistent, and chilling, and refused to allow the defense to shift the focus elsewhere. The trial continued as planned, and when the jury was finally sworn in on July 16, 1979, it felt like the final chapter was getting closer. Then came the day everyone had been waiting for, the public reveal of Lauren's confession. And let me tell you, it didn't disappoint. It was a detailed, gruesome account of everything he had done. Lauren confessed to killing Cheryl, her children, and others, describing each moment with cold precision. He even talked about how he went to the house in the evening to pick raspberries with the kids before the violence began. It was hard to believe, but Lauren's story didn't end there. According to him, after leaving the house around 8:30 p.m., he came back in the early hours of the morning around 2 or 3 a.m., slipping inside through the unlocked basement door. Once in the kitchen, he casually turned on the light, and that's when Cheryl came down to see what was going on. According to Lauren, she didn't seem too surprised to see him, and when he asked to grab some tools from the basement to fix his car, she let him go without a second thought. But things quickly took a deadly turn. After getting the lug wrench, Lauren came back upstairs and asked Cheryl for a beer. She didn't think anything was off about it. After all, he was family, right? But the moment she turned her back to get the beer, Lauren hit her over the head with the lug wrench. And that wasn't the end of it. He kept swinging, hitting her over and over again without hesitation. "And I think you're telling the truth," came the final reply that was not hesitation. The worst part, Lauren claimed Cheryl didn't make a sound. She didn't scream. She didn't cry for help. I can't even imagine what was going through her mind at that moment. Was she trying to stay quiet so she wouldn't alert her children? Was she hoping to survive this attack without drawing attention? Unfortunately, it didn't work. One of the kids heard the noise and rushed to the kitchen, only to be struck by Lauren with the same wrench. From there, he went on to attack the other children using the wrench and a tire iron. But when he heard Cheryl moaning in the kitchen, meaning she was still alive despite the brutal blows, he went back and started stabbing her. Okay. So he left the women in the kitchen, meaning she was still alive despite the brutal blows. He went back and started stabbing her. Lauren later confessed to the police that he tied up some of the children with string and then tragically assaulted 10-year-old Sharon before killing her. Just think about the horror this poor child experienced, beaten senseless and then assaulted at just 10 years old. After all of that, he drenched everyone, Cheryl, and the children in gasoline and set the entire house ablaze. And then he took Cheryl and the children in gasoline and set the entire house ablaze. However, when Lauren took the stand on September 5th, 1979, his story took a complete turn. He denied everything he had confessed to. He said, I didn't do any of that. He claimed that he only signed the confession because his psychiatrist told him it would be better for him. According to Lauren, the psychiatrist had said, "You'd be better off if you signed." And Lauren also claimed that he repeatedly requested a lawyer during his interrogation, expressing his desire to speak with one over and over. However, the police repeatedly denied his requests, insisting that they already knew he was guilty. They urged him to simply confess, convincing him that it would be better for him if he did. When questioned about the bloodstains on his clothes, Lauren offered an unusual explanation. He claimed that the blood wasn't from the murders but from a fight he had gotten into the night of the killings. According to Lauren, he had been out for coffee when some men outside the cafe attacked him. In retaliation, he said he fought back and ended up beating them. That's where the blood came from. He insisted it was a strange and highly unlikely story that left many people skeptical of his account. The situation took an even more bizarre turn when Lauren described his reaction upon learning about the murders. He stated that when the police first informed him about the killings, he was so enraged that he punched a wall in the police barracks. He claimed that in his anger, he warned the state trooper, telling him that they'd better catch the killers before he did. During the trial, the prosecutors introduced a photo of the 7 murdered children showing their innocent faces, which had never been seen by the jury before. This photograph led Lauren's lawyer to argue for a mistrial, suggesting that the emotional impact of the image could unfairly influence the jury's opinion. However, the judge dismissed the motion, and the trial continued without interruption. As the case progressed, certain pieces of evidence seemed to lend some credibility to Lauren's version of events. For instance, the way he reacted when first informed of the murders mirrored exactly what he had claimed in his confession. This alignment raised questions about whether he had actually committed the crimes or if he had been coerced into admitting to them. Moreover, a state police fingerprint expert testified during the trial that the bloody handprint found in the bathtub wasn't Lauren's. In fact, the handprint on one of the door jambs didn't match his either. This revelation raised further doubts about his involvement, particularly since the prints didn't match any of the victims or even Frederick, the father. There was also the matter of a prior interview with Lauren conducted in October 1977 by reporter Lincoln Milstein from the local newspaper The Current. This interview, which had been kept under wraps until the confession was released, revealed even more contradictions. Lauren admitted to Milstein that he had no recollection of the killings. The only things he remembered were vague snippets, talking to Cheryl, seeing bodies and blood everywhere, and the house being on fire. So he claimed that he had been so frightened and confused by what had happened that he didn't remember the events clearly. However, things took a turn in October 1977 when Lauren was transferred to a state mental hospital in Middleton for security reasons. A few weeks later, he was officially committed. A psychiatrist testified that he might be suffering from schizophrenia or epilepsy, raising doubts about his mental state at the time of the confession. With this in mind, some argued that his statements were unreliable, further questioning his accountability for the crimes. Fast forward to October 1979, the jury deliberated for hours over the course of 3 days before finding Lauren guilty on all counts of murder. They did not charge him with sexual assault, despite speculation that he might have been driven to kill after feeling ashamed of allegedly molesting one or more of the Bowdoin girls. Chief Assistant State's Attorney Walter Scanland suggested this could have been the motive, although it was never definitively proven. Meglo I, Chief Assistant State's Attorney Walter Scanland suggested this could have been the motive, although it was never definitively proven. The state tried to get the maximum possible prison sentence of 245 years, 25 years for each murder and 20 years for arson. But Judge Walter Pickett sentenced Lauren to 5 years to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 50 or 55 years. The decision was made, but it didn't take long before Lauren's attorney filed an appeal, so quickly, in fact, that it seemed as though the appeal had been pre-written and ready to go. However, the court denied his appeal, and Lauren was sent to prison. Over the years, Lauren continued to fight his conviction, filing petitions for a habeas corpus trial. Despite his efforts, each petition was rejected, and his legal battles seemed to go nowhere. For those unfamiliar with the term habeas corpus, it refers to a writ used to bring an accused person from a different jurisdiction to the court in the place where the crime occurred, essentially allowing for the review of the case. In Lauren's case, he argued that he was wrongfully convicted and that his confession should not have been used against him. Lauren was eventually transferred to McDougall Walker Correctional Facility in Suffield, Connecticut, where he spent 38 years behind bars. During this time, he accumulated 8 disciplinary offenses, including assault, possession of drugs, contraband, and other violations. His last infraction occurred in 1997 when he was charged with assault and refusing to provide a specimen. Then, in June of 2015, Lauren's health took a drastic turn. He was placed on a ventilator in the intensive care unit after suffering a severe medical crisis. As the Department of Correction indicated, Lauren had no family willing or able to make medical decisions for him. The judge was called to make a decision regarding his care, but before the meeting could take place, Lauren passed away from a severe brain bleed. He was 65 years old at the time of his death, having entered prison at the age of 27. His death remained shrouded in mystery, as no autopsy was performed and the cause of the brain bleed was never determined. Following his death, Robert DeClark, the former owner of the funeral home, sought and received custody of Lauren's remains. After performing a cremation, Lauren's ashes were stored, and DeClark periodically brought them to the Department of Correction in the hopes of finding any relatives who might come forward. But no one did. And to be honest, it feels like Lauren got exactly what he deserved, alone and forgotten. No child, not even Cheryl, deserves a death like that. The violence, the cruelty, it's almost impossible to wrap your mind around. The lingering heartbreak must have been unbearable for the remaining family, especially Fred, the father. Can you imagine the gut-wrenching realization that it was his own foster brother who had claimed the lives of his loved ones? It must have been indescribable. So that brings us to the million-dollar question. Was the sentence just, or did Lauren somehow slip through the cracks with a punishment that didn't quite fit the crime? I'd really love to know what you think about all this. If you like the way we create these videos and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.